Welcome to Life in the Bubble podcast. My name is Lydia, and I'm here hosting with Nate and Christa. We are talking about life in the bubble, our experience being raised in Fundy Light and fundamentalist homeschool communities, how that affected us as adults, and ways that we're trying to process and heal. Today, we're going to be hearing from Christa. She's starting to share her story of homeschooling and what her experience was like, both within her family and also within the community at large as a homeschool student. Christa, we're just really excited to hear your story, especially because I haven't heard it yet.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so it's kind of strange because Nate's my brother, and so I'm like, oh, how do I really tell this story? But
Right.
so I gotta
maybe just start at the beginning.
Right. So, my mom and dad met. I'm just kidding. Anyways, how
did that work?
I don't really remember when exactly like the homeschool. I remember like being a kid and like I remember being home a lot and then slowly starting into my like education at a very young age. There wasn't like, I didn't really realize that things were different because we were like, kind of like, we lived in a small town. We were kind of like off the beaten trail. We weren't like anywhere on the main part of town. We didn't have any close like neighbors or friends. And so it really didn't stand out to me that we were like kind of isolated for quite a long time. So most of it was just like at first, I remember like my mom starting to homeschool me. I remember that our parents built like a schoolhouse, like a little schoolhouse just outside of the actual house that we don't go sit in and do schoolwork in. And my mom would monitor and be like, "Oh, are you guys doing your schoolwork?" And we'd be like, "Yes, we're doing the schoolwork."
But no, did you have to walk uphill both ways is the big question.
We did not, but we did have to trudge through snow, and occasionally we did have to shovel the snow out in front of our own schoolhouse and go in, and we had to start the heater. It was very like Little House on the Prairie. We had to like start it with a little clicker and the flame would come up and then we would start. It was great. Good times. Good times.
That does sound very sweet.
Yes, it was.
And like education with carbon monoxide. Like think
right,
of that.
Exactly. Like the possibility of anything.
The possibilities were endless. Science experiment.
Did firewood for our heating and like heating the house, but also like warming the hot water. So there was a lot of work involved. So it kind of felt like a farm, even though we didn't necessarily have a farm. It kind of felt like a farm. So it's kind of like always this working system of like we'd get up at 6 a.m. and we'd do chores and then we'd do school and then we'd do work, and there might be some gaps, and there was the gaps in there for playing and stuff like that. But really a lot of my relationships were with my siblings. And I think I was probably about I know that it was happening before this, but I think I was like 7 or 8 years old when I started to realize that like my siblings really didn't like me that much. And I didn't like them that much either. We just were all, there was always a lot of conflict. I don't think my parents were really good at helping us work together as a team. It kind of ended up being more like well, Nate didn't do this, so that's why I couldn't do this. And so then Nate would get in trouble, and then Nate would be like, well, Christa didn't do this, and then I would get in trouble. And so we were kind of always at each other's necks because it wasn't about like working together. It was about who could be the favorite kid that day so that like mom wouldn't spank us.
How many siblings do you have, and where do you fall in the line?
So altogether there's 6. I'm in the middle. So we have my sister, my 2 brothers, and then me. And then there was 11 years, and then they adopted my younger brother and sister.
So if you would have asked kid me, she was the worst. Okay.
Exactly.
So she falls one below me. So that's my only interjection on this.
So for a while, and here's what's funny is that, and my siblings might deny this, but this is how it felt for me. So obviously when it's your perspective, like that's what it feels like, right? So I could be wrong, but my perspective was that a lot of times people say, oh, the youngest is spoiled. They get everything they want, so on and so forth. But for me, it actually felt like I had 3 people constantly tattling on me. So I actually felt like I got in trouble the most because it felt like there was always somebody tattling on me. So like my sister was always telling my mom something, and then my brothers we were always getting into fights. And so I always felt like I was falling at the bottom of the line of like punishment because everybody had a reason to be mad at me. And so that's when I started realizing that there was like a separation between me and them as a kid. Yeah. But I started feeling really lonely, and there was a lot of other stuff that was going on behind the scenes that I won't really get into right now, but there was other stuff that was happening too that was really isolating me more. And that's when I started realizing that like there was a gap, like I had a gap there, and I didn't really know what to do about it. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of went like that for a long time. When I got to my teenage years, my sister kind of had a falling out with my parents, and she kind of got kicked out of the whole family system, and we weren't really allowed to communicate with her. And so then
she held really hands with a boy.
She did. And so everything fell apart. Like the whole world was falling apart. So
at a Christian concert, no less.
Sounds so traumatic.
Yes.
It was horrible, really in the moment for us.
It really was, because like there was the thing that I noticed the most is that there was a lot of emotional intelligence put on very young people who didn't really understand what was going on. So we were expected to uphold this like almost accountability for our older siblings to make sure that they were like staying. So a lot of times, like when my brother or my sister were dating, I was the accountability person that was called into the situation to make sure that nothing happened. So here I am, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old a lot of times, and I am the person that's supposed to make sure that they don't fall into sin. And I
wanted to define 2 points. She was very small at this point, so she fit really well into a trunk.
Exactly.
Number 2, I never ever took her on a date. It was the other 2. Okay.
That's actually true. I never went on any dates with you and any.
I never dated a girl while at home.
That's correct.
So she never had to be subject to this mess with me.
I did not. That's true. But with my 2 older siblings, I kind of was that.
But I never went on any dates. I never was a date chaperone, which is interesting, I think, and helpful for your story.
That's true. That's true. And I actually think that that's important too, because I think that like at a very young age, there was a lot of like expectation put on me about things that were far above anything I could really understand, especially when it comes to like keeping siblings accountable, keeping people accountable, purity, being accountable for a situation that I'm not even mature enough to really fully understand.
Because you bore more responsibility than a typical 11-year-old should.
Right. So there was a lot, and not only at that same time as that happening, we had just adopted my little brother and sister, and I did take on a lot of the raising of them. There was a point in time in which my mom stopped getting up at night, and I was getting up at night and feeding them the bottles and doing all of that.
There's such a joke here that I'm not even going to touch it, but
you should touch it. Totally fine.
No, I'm the only man in the room.
Oh, that's probably true. But yeah, there was a point in time where I was bearing that load while also like being and then on top of that, there was everybody else was a lot older than me, so they were already working jobs, and so there was less expectation for them in the house. So there was more work but less people, so I was just taking on more work. So I'm taking on more work, and I'm trying to do my own education. I'm taking care of 2 babies by the time I was 12, because we had adopted 2 babies, and so I was getting up at night, I was cleaning up the throw up, I was doing all that stuff. And I actually remember, I don't know if you remember this, Nate, there's a point in time when I was actually, I was supposed to be doing the disciplining as well. And Nate walked in at one point when I was disciplining David, my younger brother, and he got really upset because he felt like I was over the top. And at the time I was like, well, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But looking back, I was like, well, yeah, of course. Like I was a kid. I didn't know what the heck I didn't know what boundaries were. I just knew that I needed this child to behave so I didn't get in trouble. So I was being really aggressive with my younger sibling because, well, I'm basically the step-in parent in this moment. And I don't know what to do. I just know that I have this responsibility and I have to get it right or I failed, and there's going to be big consequences.
Yeah. And that was like a really challenging time for me. I'm sorry to interject, but just because I felt like there was so much a mess, and I was realizing so much. I was trying to like fix so much that I saw at that moment. Such a messed up time, really. And it just really, there was a lot of oversteps really in kind of in the relationship.
So just to recap the brief slice of your life that we've heard so far, there's parentification, major parentification, pretty significant isolation.
And the thing is that I would actually say, I can say really honestly, at this point in my life, I'd still never had a single friend yet. Like I had never had a friend. There was a few occasions where I almost had some pen pals that like, there was like this little nature magazine we'd get and people would write into it. And, you know, other kids would be like, oh, I want a pen pal. So you write them back. But there was a point in time where I had this pen pal and I wish I could remember her name now so I could look her up. Where her and I started writing back and forth and she felt like a friend, but then my mom would read all the letters. And so one day she sent a letter about something that was going on in her life. And my mom was like, no, that's too much. I don't want you talking to this person anymore. And so she wrote her back and said, you will no longer be corresponding with my daughter. You need to find another friend. That's how that pen pal ended. The only friend I really had that I could even like begin to start relating to or opening up to. So then fast forward, my sister kind of gets pushed out of our family. Both of my older brothers are out working. And at the exact same time, my dad loses his job. And so he is no longer working. So my mom starts going to work. My mom starts working. So my dad's working under the table at this garage or something.
This was like kind of around 07, 08. So people know it was a really tough time to get a job.
Yes.
So it wasn't the lack of like getting a job was what he was trying to do. So I guess kind of, like hard work was like the pinnacle of this household.
Yeah,
it really was. So, you know, dad would work during the day under the table. Mom would sleep all day so she could go to work at night and be as a nurse aide. And so suddenly everything got a lot more isolating because everybody was out of the house pretty much, except for me. And I took on the sole job of educating my younger siblings and myself. And the problem with that was that I wasn't really actually educating myself at all. I was just educating them. My education was falling to the side because I was now cleaning, cooking for the whole family, doing bedtime routine, putting kids to bed, I was doing everything in order to make the household function. And so that's when I got so lonely and I was just like, I did something that my parents probably to this day don't quite fully understand how deep I got, but I went and joined a message board and I met 3 girls that I'm still actually really good friends with today.
Wait a minute. On the internet?
On the internet, yes. I joined a message board and I started talking to strangers. And that was the first time that I realized like just how isolated I really was, because these girls were out and they were just having normal lives and they had normal parents that they could talk to. And I was sitting there, you know, typing on my keyboard, talking, and then we're having like little chats and I'm not telling them what's going on around me, but I'm sitting there and I'm like, where's my life? I don't have one. I'm just kind of sitting here managing somebody else's life, and everybody else around me is there. You know, one of my really good friends, like she trained her own horse and was doing Congress like things with like, you know, competing the horse with other horses. And I was like, who's time for that? I mean, and I didn't have a hobby. You know, I didn't have anything that I had time to do because I was so tired and I just go to bed. So at this time, I'm like trying to figure out like where I fall in all this. And I'm realizing that there's people out there that have like really nice lives. And some of them were also homeschooled. So it wasn't just like people in public school. They were also homeschooled and they were still having a healthier experience than I was.
So and then sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Absolutely. Ask questions.
So you didn't really have a concept of, you thought that your life was normal.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
This is normal. This is average.
Yep. This is what everybody does. And anybody who doesn't do it, they're just bad daughters. Like, this is our responsibility. We're supposed to serve the family, because that was what we got taught. You have to serve the family. You have to contribute. You don't get to live here for free. You're not a teenager. You're a young adult. We don't have kids or teenagers in this house. We have young adults.
Yes.
There's never a point in time in which I was ever a kid. That could just be. I was always an adult, pretty as long as I can remember.
Are you comfortable telling us a little bit about the modesty clothing the discussion, really, like how that played a role in this story?
That's really good too, because especially my experience was really unique. Like, my mom cut my hair like super duper short. Like, she kept it short, and I looked like a boy. Like, I literally looked like a boy. Okay. But on top of that, like, at the same time, my mom was like, oh, it's safer for you, because if you're like our attractive woman, you know, bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to tempt, even as far as to say, you will tempt your brothers if you're too feminine. You tempt your brothers if you're too feminine. So there was this idea of, like, even me presenting myself at home would cause my own brothers to stumble. And I mean, I don't want to do that, right? And so, like, a lot of it was just like, my mom never taught me how to buy a bra. Never. She never taught me how to buy a bra. And at one point when I was like 17, she sat me down, she started asking me all these like really explicit questions about like sex and stuff like that. And basically she came around to saying, like, it's really unnatural for you to desire sex. Women don't desire sex. It's not normal for you to want that. And I think and she literally goes, I think it's because of the food you're eating. It's got too much stuff in it that's causing your hormones to go out of balance. So we're going to put you on a diet to get that cleansed out of you, so that these things will calm down. I also think that this was a huge reason why I had a lot of issues with like my cycle during my teenage years, because I wasn't eating things that were like really going to help my body going through hormones and stuff like that, because my mom was like, oh no, we have to make sure that you don't have those feelings and you don't want to express them. So there's just like this whole slew of, no matter what I did, it was wrong. Like, if I had nightmares, it was my fault. If I had a sex drive, it was my fault. If I liked boys, it was my fault. If I wanted to look pretty, that's selfish. And it was just like a long laundry list of all these things that I carried with me of how bad I was. Like, I actually have a journal from when I was a teenager, and it is just filled with all this self-hate of like, literally praying like, Jesus, get this out of me, take this away from me. I don't want to feel this way. I'm struggling with like loneliness. I'm struggling with feeling like if I just took myself off this planet, everybody would be happier, because then they won't have to deal with my sorry person that's here, you know, taking so much energy from them and eating their food and spending their electricity, even though at the same time I am cooking, I am cleaning, I am educating, I am raising these kids. And I felt like I was still stealing from my parents, even while doing all of that. So we had this, when we were kids, there was this other homeschool family we were close with, but then our parents had a falling out with them. And all of us kids were about the same age. So when this happened, we were like forbidden for years to not speak to them. We'd see them out in public, and her mom would be like, oh, don't look at them, don't talk to them. And my mom would be like, walk the other way. And we're not allowed to engage. But we didn't understand it. We didn't know why we couldn't talk to each other. So me and this girl ended up reconnecting right about the time I turned 18 and started dating this guy. Her and I reconnect, and she was working at this place in where we lived. And she was like, hey, I can talk to my supervisor and get you a job. And so she talked to her supervisor and got me a job. And my mom literally was really upset at me. She's like, well, now I have to quit my job to come home so that you can have a job. And I think that was the first time I sort of stood up for myself. And I said, well, I know that's really hard, but like, I can't do this forever. I'm not literally their mom. I remember telling them, I'm like, I'm not literally their mom. So I need to step out, because if I do end up getting married, I'm going to leave them, and they need to know who their parents are, thinking it's not me. So she came home. She was really angry about that. And it was really hard for me to like not have all this like guilt about how awful of a daughter I am, because I'm not. Because she was like, well, you could just work from home. I'm like, no, I really want to do this just for a little while. I started, I met a guy. I had it that, so we did this, we were homeschooled, so we went square dancing. I'm not gonna lie,
yes.
square dancing was some of the best times of my life. Best time of my life.
Country dancing.
Yes. Best time of my life was square dancing, because it was so fun. It really was. And so I met a guy through square dancing, and I did genuinely like him. I really did. But I do think that I did kind of see like the possibility of like an escape. Like, oh, I could finally get out. Like I could finally go do something. So he meets my parents and he meets our family, and we start courtship, right? The whole courtship thing. So we're doing the courtship thing. Mom and dad give him permission to date me. It's great. Everything's going great as well. But so I was dating this guy, and as I was dating him, the longer we continued to go out. So even though we were like courting and all this stuff, he was progressively starting to push my boundaries more and more, and like asking for more things. And I was like, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. Blah, blah, blah. Because like, I knew that I was the whole reason I was supposed to keep him out of sin. And I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy like hugging him and snuggling with him. Of course I did. It was great. It was fantastic. But he was pushing other boundaries. He was wanting to touch me, and he was wanting to do things that made me uncomfortable. And I remember one time specifically, I had been working all day, and I was sitting at home, and my parents weren't home, and he came over, and he comes upstairs, and he's sitting there, and we're watching TV, and he wanted me to snuggle him in a very controversial way. Let's just put it that way. And I said, I don't want to do that right now. I really just, because we had done it before, because it made him happy. And I said, I don't want to do that right now. I've had a really bad day, and I just want to sit here. And he got angry at me, and he literally refused to talk to me until I did it. And I sat there for like an hour trying to wait him out, and he literally just stared at the TV, wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't look at me, wouldn't touch me, wouldn't do anything. And he just like, and he just kept saying like, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. And he was from the homeschool community too. So there was like a whole, like, it wasn't like he didn't know these same boundaries, but like suddenly I'm sitting there and I'm realizing like, I'm putting him into sin by just existing in the space with him, I guess. And so I tried to put up more boundaries, but like at that point I was like, we'd gone too far, and we hadn't even really done anything, but it was like still far enough that now there was like no way I could do it no way I could push back without it being a fight. And I genuinely thought I was supposed to marry him, because I thought I was supposed to marry the first man I date. So I'm here and I'm trying to figure out what to do. I feel like I can't go tell my parents, because I know that they're going to be so disappointed in me. And like, how could I have, led this godly man down this route? Like, this is definitely my fault.
Godly man.
And so there was like,
teenager.
there was a lot of turmoil. Well, and he was a lot older than me. I was like 19 and he was 25. So there was a good age gap there. He was old enough to know more about, he'd been in more relationships than I have.
Okay.
So at the time I was also going to his church, which was a Mennonite church. It was a more liberal Mennonite church. It wasn't like all bonnets and all that stuff. But I also had this experience of going back to his old church, where it was like a very old Mennonite belief system. And I remember standing there as he was telling me, he stood there and he pointed out all these different men. And he started telling me things about them. He's like, oh, that guy, he got this girl pregnant. But so what would happen is in the Mennonite community, they get to go out for a while, like kind of like the Rumspringer thing. But then once they've sowed their wild seeds, they get to come back and they get a virgin for a wife. These girls are 15, 16 years old. So we're at this wedding of this girl who's 16. She's not wearing a wedding dress. She's just wearing like a pink dress with a bonnet, because they can't do anything too fancy. And he's there telling me of this laundry list of really distorted things that this guy has done as this 15-year-old girl's walking down the aisle to marry him. And I'm like, what is happening? And then he proceeds to just like tell me, he just starts, and that guy, and that guy, oh, and this one time we did this thing together. And so I'm learning things about him too, that I'm like, what is happening right now? What's happening? Like, and in my mind, I'm going, this doesn't feel okay, but he's the guy I'm supposed to marry. I'm not supposed to date. I can't just walk away. This is what I'm supposed to do. And so I'm sitting there and I'm just like holding all of this on me. And I'm like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with all this. And so he kind of gets to this point where he's like, oh, we need to get married. We need to get married. And I keep going, I'm not ready to get married. I'm not ready to get married. Like, that's the only thing I know how to say. I'm like, I'm not ready. And I remember very specifically one time, he's like, I'm going to go home and pray and ask God what's wrong with you, that you're not ready. Once again, somebody from this is from the same community we grew up, like he grew up right next to my other brother's like wife's family. Like they all knew each other. This is all in the community, that same homeschool conservative community. And I got to this point where I just felt so like I literally felt like God was telling me I needed to step out. Like I need to break up with him. I need to break up with him. But I didn't know how to do that because I wasn't supposed to do that. I go to my parents and I say, hey, like, I think I need to break up with him. And they're like, well, what poor decisions have you made that's causing you to, like, why aren't you ready for this marriage? And I was like, I can't do it. And he deserves to be with somebody who wants to do it. So like, that's how I kind of did it. So then at that point, it was like, it didn't matter. It was at a bad time of year. So we had Christmas, New Year's, and then our 1 year anniversary. There was no good time to break up, but I knew I had to do it. So I did it in between. I literally did it like 2 days after New Year's. It was awful. I broke up with him.
Good for you.
And that's when the bottom of the barrel fell out and everything became really clear, because everybody in the community was mad at me because I broke his heart. And I suddenly couldn't go to a square dance and get a dancing partner because nobody knew. Everybody knew that, like, oh, that was his girl, so we can't. She did that thing. I had a family that we'd been close with. The mom comes up to me in the mall while I'm out buying shoes, and she goes, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe it, and I hope God curses you for it. I'm freaking 19 years old. I go to a bonfire with a group of friends, and he comes up to me at the bonfire and he starts yelling at me at the bonfire. And I'm standing there, and my best friend's next to me. She was the only person that really supported me during this time. And she was also from the homeschool community, but she was like the only one that was like, no, I don't think you have to feel this way. And she's standing there and she's like holding my arm and she's trying to pull me away. He's yelling at me. And I look behind him and there's like a line of all of my friends just watching him do it. And nobody said anything because they thought he was completely justified in it. And I was like, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have a church. I don't have friends. I can't go do any things I used to love. And nobody wants me. Like now I'm like this tarnished thing. Like nobody wants me, all because I said I put up a boundary and I said I don't want to marry this person. Like it wasn't, I never even said it was his fault or anything. I just said like I'm not ready. And I just watched just like all these people that I thought were my friends, people that I really valued, wouldn't even look at me or talk to me or call me on the phone. And then like my parents would invite him over for dinner while I was at the house, and I would have to leave and go be somewhere else because they were helping him work through it. And the final straw was when I was at home one day and he started texting me and he's like, I need to talk to you. I'm like, I don't want to talk. We need to take some space. And he said, well, I'm coming over. He's a locksmith. Like he does that as a hobby. And so I'm like, he could perfectly capable of getting into this house if he wanted to. And my parents weren't home. So I called my dad and I said, Dad, like he's saying this stuff. He's coming over. I really need you to call him and tell him to stop because this is your house. And I need you to like tell him he can't come in your house. And my dad said, well, this is what you get for bringing in men and getting me attached to them and then taking them away. You deal with it yourself. And he hung up on me. And that's when I knew there was nowhere left for me. And
You were
that's when
outside of the umbrella of protection.
I suddenly realized like how unequipped I was to even save myself. Like I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have a network. The network was gone. And I didn't have like real people that like, it's like the second you don't do exactly what is like written in stone for you to do, there's nothing. So you either have to go back or you have to try to wing it on your own.
Christa, I think listening to your story, anyone would be shocked by that story and just how like insular the community is, how pervasive the patriarchal attitudes are. Like the fact that you're literally shunned because you wouldn't, like you broke up with this guy for very good reasons and you didn't like slander him. You didn't give the reasons for why you were breaking up with him, which were very good reasons. The fact that the men in the community expected to have all of this sexual freedom, all of this liberty, and then commit to this like virginal woman, and that you could sort of see that happening and like chose to not go into a marriage like that. It's just it's just absolutely stunning. And I'm shocked. And I'm so sorry to you.
I also think like another thing to say is like overall, it's not like overall this person was like this horrible person. It's not like they were like evil to the core. There was a lot of things that we both had learned that were lies, and we weren't realizing that we were perpetuating them on each other. And when I realized I didn't necessarily even leave the relationship because I was like, oh, you're a horrible person. I left it because I said, I'm not the right person. You're looking for something very specific that I'm realizing I can't give you. And I'm realizing I can't commit to. Like if we were about to get married, then maybe some of that stuff wouldn't have made me uncomfortable. But I was like, I'm uncomfortable with this. And I need to listen to something inside of me that's saying that this just isn't the right fit. And so it wasn't really even that this person was horrible or that like the breakup itself, every breakup's bad. The breakup itself wasn't bad. It was the community witch hunt was the problem. And I don't know that he even really knew necessarily what that looked like or that was really going on. And I don't really know that I knew how to describe that at the time.
Well, I think the big challenge, to maybe derail for a minute here, is this world teaches so much that the man is correct, and whatever kind of comes into his brain, he's right. And so he's acting on in this world is, father gave me authority, your father, who's your authority figure in this world. I'm not saying this is the way. I'm just maybe explaining for those who don't understand the context of this world. So your dad has authority over you, and he is the say so. So when he said you may date my daughter, his man that's not your father, this man that you're dating or courting or however you want to explain that, has some type of like transfer of power that's now coming on you as you move towards marriage. And he really believes that he has an authority to say you have to do these things, because when you're married, you as the woman have to please him and pleasure him in any way that he believes. And that's what we've been taught as men in this context.
And taught as women as well. Like,
but look at it from the man's perspective, like this is your role, like be my wife. And so he's looking at this like, if you're going to be my wife, like why can't you touch me or hold my hand or whatever it may be? It may not be, sex at the moment, but it's really starting to lead toward that. And that's typically why I see courtship goes really fast into marriage, because we're like, well, might as well just go there because we're just transfer the authority and we go on. And I think that's where it gets really challenging for people, especially from the guy's standpoint of like, well, they might as well just move this thing along because I want to have authority over this woman so I can do, that's the mentality that's been kind of drilled into you. And the girl's kind of like, oh, I have to do that because, well, dad said so. And that's kind of the world you get yourself stuck in. You don't really get a lot of choices as the woman. And the guy's just kind of acting on these automatic things that they've been taught, and they don't even contain in scripture. They're just things that are there that have been told to do. And that's the world that you found yourself caught in. And so interjecting myself into this world. So I like to give just a brief context to this. So my wife now, and we were engaged at this point when this breakup happened, and she saw this happen, and we really had a long conversation of, we need to help your sister. What do we need to do? And it was really the moment where we kind of had an intervention with you. I don't know if you remember this. We kind of had a sit down intervention with you, and we really had to walk you through, like, you are not responsible for these kids anymore. And you argued with us.
Yes.
And we said, you should, if you want to go to college, you should go to college. And you argued with us. Yes. And said, you should be allowed to rent your own apartment. And you argued with us. And you said, I have to please my mom. And I remember my wife saying, you don't have to make your mom happy in every single way. These are normal desires that are very healthy to want.
Yes.
And so it took you a little bit of time, but this wasn't the only voice you were hearing it from. But we kind of had a little intervention with you and started you through that process of unentangling your life from your parents.
And also Nate had to be really careful at the time too about how much he engaged with all of this, because like wouldn't be the first time that our parents cut off an older sibling because of their persuasion or their opinions or whatever. So like Nate had to be very careful how he engaged in this, because he was just in the right spot where everything was just like a certain way. And so he had to engage in a very careful way. Like, I want to help you, but are you open to help? Because if you're not open to help, I'm going to back off. Because if I wasn't open to receiving that help or listening, like, I would feel the obligation to go.
And my main purpose was not to preserve the relationship with my parents at this moment.
Right.
That ship had sailed, but my main purpose was to see if I could preserve a relationship with you and saying, I want to help you. I know how to get past this. I've done it.
Right.
And I can help you do it too, if you are willing to be helped. But I can't help you unless you're willing.
That's so key. Because it's ingrained in you to be committed to your family, be helpful to your family, and your role is so crucial. Like, the work that you do is crucial, the parenting that you do is crucial, and so there's so much guilt when you try to step away from that. And
it was also this idea of like, I thought for sure I was going to be a wife. I thought for sure that was where I was going. So now that I've come, and I literally got to the point where I felt so sick to my stomach. I was like, I know that this isn't the right thing for me, but how can it not be? Because I don't have any other purpose. And so now I was on the other side of it, and I'm standing there like, so if my purpose isn't to marry this person, and now the whole community won't even touch me, what purpose and what can I do? Because now I don't hold value in this community any longer. I don't hold value as a wife, and I don't hold value as a single woman, because I was only supposed to marry one person.
But I see it as it's really a God thing. Like, you had a convergence of like godly women, like come into your life. One of them was my wife, but also one of them was this other lady that I think you're going to get to, who was like one of my favorite people in the world, who really took you in. I really love this couple because they took her in, were able to do things that a brother's not able to do. But I was also able to go and say, thank you for being an ally to my family.
Yes. Yeah. So when I started going to college, and right about that time. So my other brother was getting married, and he was buying my parents' house from them. So they were moving to a smaller house, and there wasn't room for me, but so was expectation. I need to move with them. There's a lot of conversations about how exactly I was supposed to live there. And one of them was me quitting college and building a barn out in the backyard and living in that and paying rent.
Because everyone wants to live in a barn behind their parents' house.
Right. So after this whole debacle with breaking up with the person, I was out of a church. So she's my best friend. She was like, okay, just come to my church. Okay. So I started going to her church. And that's when I start engaging with people for the first time that are like normal. I met this couple, and they were the youth pastors of this church. And he would stand there and he would give these sermons. I'd never heard anything like it. It just was so different. And he backed it up with scripture. and facts. And I was like, wow, like I can't even like argue with them because this makes sense. Like not only does it like, are they explaining something that makes sense, but they're showing me how God behaves this way and how God blah, blah, blah. And so I would come in every single Sunday, and it was always a battle because my parents didn't want me going to a church. They didn't think organized church was like, the way, because we're homeschooled. Everything's got to be done at home. We did home churching our whole lives, all that. And so they would fight with me every Sunday. They'd fight with me. Like they'd be like, you need to spend more time with your family. You need to be at home. And I'm like, this is the one day a week that I go do anything for myself. I just go to church. I go to my friend's grandparents' house, and then I come home because we go there for lunch. And so, and this was a while. So I had been out of the relationship for a while. It wasn't like right after. It was a whole about year and a half before all of this happened. So I had gone a year and a half. I'd been going to school. I'd been trying to navigate going to college and dealing with like how my parents felt about it, which they weren't in agreement with it. There were several guys that they tried to get me with in that time span as well. And I do remember like just trying, kind of like fighting up current, trying to find like the balance that kept everybody sort of happy. And so I kept coming to church, and this couple, one day I'm sitting there next to him, and he just goes, I want you to know something. And I was like, okay. And he's like, if you need out, you can come live with me and my wife. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, if you need out, we can help you.
Wow.
And I was like, okay.
You really needed an escape at that point.
I really did, because there wasn't really an avenue left. Like I really didn't have anywhere to go or anybody I could go to. And I didn't have enough finances to actually support myself yet. So I think I thought about it for 2 weeks. And I finally, this was like really humbling to go up to somebody and be like, I need help. And I did. I was like, I need help. I need out. I really do. And so they're like, okay. And the way we talked about it was that I was going to be house sitting for them as a job. So I was going to be working for them and house sitting for them while they did all these youth group trips, which wasn't true at all, but that's what we did. My parents had a sit down interview with them to make sure they were good people, and they played the part. Like they knew what the expectation was. They knew what needed to happen. They knew what needed to happen. So they covered all the bases. And this is right about the time that I actually met my husband, which was on accident. I wasn't looking for somebody. He did not come from that community. He didn't even come from the same state. He worked in the oil field.
He was from Pennsylvania, actually.
From Pennsylvania.
There's only like 2 people I know from Pennsylvania.
Right. And we kind of met on accident. So him and I had just started sort of getting to a place where we're like, okay, maybe we kind of like each other. And my parents kind of were like, oh, we think that you like this person. Do you like this person? And I didn't really give them an answer. I said, if I did, what would you say about it? And my mom said, we would tell you no.
And you were like, well, we're getting married tomorrow.
And I was like,
too bad.
And I was like, okay. And she's like, I was like on the verge of moving out. Like I was like a week away from moving out. And they knew that. And she's like, are you going to let us tell you no? And I said, no, this one's on me. And then I moved out.
And you left the umbrella of protection.
And I left the umbrella of protection. And there was a lot of crazy things that happened after that as well. But I think one of the things I remember the most is there were several times where like I would get those guilt trip phone calls from my mom or whatever. And I would come home in tears. And this couple would sit there every night. They were like sitting on the couch every night when I came home just to see like what emotional state I was going to be in. And I would just sit there and I would cry and I would tell them like, I feel so horrible. I'm not doing all these things. And they say I'm doing this. And they would just sit there and they were really good about presenting me with facts. Like, well, that's not true. And here's why. That's not true. And here's why. They didn't feed into the emotions. They fed me the facts of the situation so that I could see like where the emotions stopped and where the facts began, because that's really important. I've learned in this community, as a lot of this is engulfed in emotion, and it's not factual. It's not based off of like real systems that work and actually protect and encourage strong and healthy relationships and marriages and families. And so I needed somebody who was going to sit there, who wasn't going to get emotional, and it was going to go, let me show you the reasons why that doesn't make sense. Yeah. And I am so grateful to, like, they literally saved my life. They had saved my life in so many levels. And they were a really intricate part into the dating life of Justin and I. They did our marriage, our like premarital counseling. I loved watching them just be married because they were so unique. Like, I could watch these people freaking fight with each other, and I go to school and I come back 3 hours later and they're upstairs watching YouTube videos, giggling. Like, I'd never seen anything. Like, they loved each other. Like, they had been married almost 10 years and they legitimately liked each other. And it was mind blowing to me, to just see somebody, like, how they could process through an argument without it being like this devastating 5-day thing, and then move on. They just moved on. I couldn't like that. I couldn't even grasp. And so they were a huge intricate part in the Justin and I's relationship. And we were really like, we want to mirror this relationship. Like, this is something we want to mirror. And thankfully, Justin wasn't really from that world. Like, even though he came from like an evangelical world, he still was like public school. Like, his mom, divorced his dad when he was younger. So there was a lot of like moving parts that were not, that had his mind in a different spot based on like how things should be done. And it wasn't until after we got married and we ended up kind of getting in some really bad financial debt, that we realized that I was counting on him to make all the decisions, and he wasn't very good at making them. Wow. And he was like, I love you, but I can't make these decisions by myself. I need you to help me. I need you to help me know what the right decision is, because I actually don't know. I did not know that that was even like a possibility. And so it was probably almost 2 years into our marriage before we finally started to like really. And so now this is just my opinion. I don't feel like this is the opinion for necessarily everybody, but we don't have a head of household. We are both head of household. But I think another time when I started realizing my education, there was so much education gap, was in my relationship, and especially about sex, the way sex was, the way I really had a hard time engaging with sex and not feeling a lot of shame. The way it's taken me until, Justin and I, we married 8 years this May. It's taken me until the last 2 years to begin to take ownership of my own body, to take ownership of my hair, to take ownership of my face, to like go, okay, I do want to actually paint my nails. I am going to wear leggings, and I don't care what the guys think. I don't care. And so it took me so long to start having ownership of my own body and of my own sexuality, even because there was so much shame around it. Like, I can't wear this. I can't do this. I can't eat that. I can't get fat. Being pregnant was really messy, because it just felt like, well, I'm not this pretty person now. And now like things don't look the same and they don't feel the same. And the constant fear of like, well, everything I was grown up with is like, well, you have to keep his interest, and you're recovering from having a baby, and that's not something you're not really interested in his interest at that point. And it's like, there's so many fears that come up, and you're like, I am asking my like very faithful, loving husband if he's going to cheat on me because I just had a baby and I have 24 stitches. Like, what am I? Of course not. Like, and for him, he's like, well, what kind of man do you think I am that I would do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what kind of man you are, because the only kind of men I've ever known are these kind, and they all do it. They're all supposed to do it, and it's all supposed to be my fault. It's not supposed to be like, you're not actually supposed to be the person that's wrong in this. It's my fault. They always say like, oh, our kids missed out on the things that like were really going to hurt them. Like, at least they missed out on those boyfriends in high school, and they didn't need to go to prom. And the thing is like, I really wanted to do those things. I actually kind of would have liked to go to a prom. I would have liked to learn how to do my hair and makeup before I was 27 years old. Because when I turned 27 years old and I'm trying to figure out my hair and makeup for the first time, there's too much shame to go ask my friends that know how to do hair and makeup, how to do hair and makeup. Because I'm 27 years old, I should know how.
Yeah.
I'm 27 years old, I should know how to, I should know my bra size, and I'm figuring my bra size out for the first time. I'm 27 years old and I'm realizing that the jeans that I'm wearing are actually terrible for my body. And it's just like, there was so much shame because I couldn't go to I felt ashamed to go to other people and admit that I didn't know how to even be a woman. I feel angry of the neglect to my, to who I was as a person. There was never a point in time that anybody from my parents, anytime growing up, that there was a point in time we're going to invest in you and help you, like, and just invest in who you are, like get to know you and what are your likes or dislikes, what do you want to do, what are the things that you care about, like that was never a priority. It was never on the table. And so it took me until I was almost 30 years old to realize that that everybody else's happiness isn't actually my responsibility.
Yeah. So, Christa, maybe a couple follow-up questions here if you're willing to answer. So,
of course.
If somebody's an alumni and they're listening to this and they haven't processed as far as you, maybe they're married, have some kids, and they're like, I kind of want what she has. Where do you start? Where do you think somebody could start?
Honestly, I think that a couple places you could start. My number one advice is always going to be therapy. If you have a partner who's supportive, just look into getting, even if you go find like a Christian therapist, if you have a partner that's supportive of you getting just a little bit, just talking to somebody, I would definitely, that's always my first advice, get a therapist, because that was a big moment for me. My therapist was able to help me walk through a lot. So my next piece of advice would be, find one thing you love to do that doesn't benefit anybody else. It only benefits you, because likely that is the thing that you were created to do. And it's meant for your pleasure. It's meant for you. You're allowed to enjoy that all by yourself. It doesn't have to, you don't have to show it to anybody. You don't have to feel bad about it. Like, that thing was put in you for a purpose. And that is another great place to start unpacking, like, just that, those feelings and those things of like, where do I belong? What am I supposed to do? Like, do something that just benefits you. I would also probably suggest maybe just one of my favorite things to listen to that really helped me deconstruct a lot of homeschool stuff, but also like evangelical stuff, it's called the Bad Christian Podcast. You can find it on Spotify. Bad Christian Podcast. And the thing is, it's actually run by some guys that are Christians and they're in a Christian band, but they talk about a lot of things that a lot of people would consider bad Christian. Like, you know, they'll talk about sex, and not in an inappropriate, graphic way, but they'll talk about like the relationships that they've had with their wives and how they realized things about their wife's sexuality that the culture they grew up, you know, didn't teach them. Stuff like that. It's so refreshing to hear other Christians talk about things that they're actually struggling with that are very relatable.
Oh, I have a question too. I have been trying to figure out how to deal with regret, especially for decisions I made before I knew better. Decisions I made when I was still very wrapped up in trying to please my parents, trying to, you know, follow a certain biblical worldview. What do you suggest? How do you deal with regret? Just kind of accept the past.
Right. I always say, go back in time as yourself right now and look at yourself as a separate person back then. She did the best she could with what she had on hand. Did the best she could. She didn't have any other resources on hand for her to be able to do more. And you really need to have grace for that woman. Like, see her as a little bit different woman. Almost see her as a younger version of you, or a younger sibling. Like, would you talk this way to a sibling who is going through this? You wouldn't, because you'd be like, no, you don't, like, I know you don't see all the different ways that you can go, in all the ways you don't have to carry this burden. So you would never tell a younger person going through those things that you tell yourself. You have to go and say, like, you did so well with what you had. Thank you. Thank you for doing the best that you could. And it's not your fault. And I think that's a big thing. We have to stop blaming ourselves, because there was adults in our life that knew better and could have done better.
Follow-up comment I'm going to have on that too is the context that we all grew up in was this condemning, shameful life that if you think or breathe the wrong way or wash your hands the wrong way, or there's so many things that you might do wrong that we have to always be on guard to correct ourselves. And you can't go back in time and be like, oh my gosh, maybe I did this, maybe God, forgive me. And so I've got a little scripture I want to read, and I'm going to read it in the message because I just want to wake everybody up.
Yes, do it.
I am big, big on different Bible versions and stuff, but it's that struggle of like, we're always trying to like make things better ourselves. Like, quit doing the work yourself because somebody already did it for you. Dang it. You can't do it yourself. So Romans 7, and I think it's important sometimes I'm going to lead into there's no condemnation in Christ. Everybody starts there, but there's a bunch of there's 7 chapters before that, by the way. So you just read the whole book of Romans. But starting in Romans 7:24 says, I've tried everything and nothing helps. At the end of my rope, is there no one who can do anything for me? And he says, isn't that the real question? The answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. He's acted to set things right in this life of contradictions where I want to serve God with all my heart and mind, which that's what we were raised to do.
Right.
But I'm being pulled by the influence of sin to do something totally different. And we were told that if we did all these things right and we looked the right way and dressed the right way and did all the right things, that we would be holy enough for God. So Romans 8, with the arrival of Jesus, the Messiah, that fateful dilemma is resolved. So don't hold your younger self to stay accountable to these old rules, this old law that you got put under God's grace. So as those who enter into Christ, being here for us, no longer have to live, and I love this part, under a continuous low-lying black cloud. A new power is in operation. The spirit of life in Christ, like a strong wind, has magnificently cleared the air, freeing you from a fated lifetime of brutal tyranny at the hands of sin and death. And that is ultimately what the homeschool life was a tyranny of sin and death, because we were trying to work for holiness rather than living under grace. And it's not specifically because it was homeschool, but that was the bill of goods that were sold, is if you did all these things, then you would be holy enough and blameless enough for God. And so would your kids, and they would grow up these holy, perfect people, and they would continue to do it over and over and over again. And as we know, it doesn't work. Yeah. And why do you think so many have left?
Thanks everyone for joining us with this podcast episode of Life in the Bubble. We really appreciate you listening, and we hope that it was helpful as you process and unlearn and heal from trauma that may have happened during your homeschool experience. Definitely give us a follow if you'd like more content like this, and definitely look for more podcasts in the future as you continue on your journey. Thanks again for listening. Have a wonderful day.